and that he was the person who was infected. All of the European forms of HIV are derived from that particular individual. And the reason you can tell that is because of the tools that molecular evolutionary biology has available. As you also probably know, AIDS is very difficult to cure, and the reasons, in order to understand the reasons, you have to understand some evolutionary biology. It's evolutionary biology that tells you why it is that HIV is so difficult to cure. For one thing, the virus, which you're seeing over here, attacking a human cell, that's a human lymphocyte cell, a human defense immune system cell. The virus mutates very rapidly. Mutations are one of the two fundamental components of evolution. Evolution works with two fundamental processes. One is mutation, which is random, and the other one is natural selection, which is not random. Well, mutations in the HIV virus occur very rapidly, which is one of the reasons that it's very difficult to find a cure, because it literally mutates under your very nose, since it has a very rapid life cycle. The other one is the environment. The environment of an HIV virus is very complex because it depends on the sexual behavior of individuals, which are very complex and varied across the world. And in fact, they are so varied that there are different kinds of HIV virus that are adapted to exploit one kind of sexual behavior or another. All of this is perfectly understandable in terms of evolution. What you're looking at from the 1940s on is the evolution of a new form of virus and how it spreads through populations and adapts to new conditions. This is exactly what evolutionary biology would predict. Now, what about the idea of evolution as descent with modification, which was Darwin's original definition of evolution? So that's what he meant. He wasn't aware of this particular kind of diagram, but this is a diagram of the evolution of the ceratopsians. The ceratopsians are the three-horned dinosaurs, which are very common in museums, in paleontological museums all over the world. That's what we know right now, as of now, of the evolution of ceratopsians. These are the different forms and how they are related to each other. You can see, incidentally, that there are a lot of intermediate forms, which is another one of the myths of creation, that the intermediate forms are not there. Well, evolution is descent with modification, that is, as this kind of diagram that I'm showing here. It's studied by a variety of disciplines, including comparative anatomy and paleontology. And the evidence for this evolution by descent comes from a variety of disciplines, from organisms morphology, for the study of the physiology of those organisms, from the developmental biology of those organisms. All of these different pieces of information, which of course I don't have time to give you into any detail at this point, will fit very well with each other, and they represent the general evolutionary explanation of how life actually emerges. There's also, of course, evidence from the fossil record, and what you're looking at here is the evidence from the fossil record, or it's part of the evidence from the fossil record. I'll show you a few other pieces of evidence from the fossil record in a minute. But this is what evolutionary biologists mean by descent from by modification. Let me give a specific example. Like in the case of the HIV virus for molecular evolution, let me give you a specific example in the case of descent and modification. One of the best known examples of descent and modification that we have come to understand in the last few years is the evolution of whales, which is sort of summarized over here. These are the actual skeletons that have been found in the fossil record. These are the actual whales, currently living whales. There are two major kinds of whales, the sperm whales and the white whales is over here. So the baleen whales of one kind and the toothed whales of the other kind. These are some of the intermediate in the fossil record, and this is a reconstruction of what these might have looked like. Well, how do we know? Because we have a bunch of the intermediates. Of course, we don't have the actual animals, so this picture that is looking at you is not what we have. What we have is the skeleton of that creature. The evolution of whales started about 55 million years ago with some animals of this kind, which are called mesonychids. These were hyena-like creatures. They were scamators and fish hunters. And if you want to find something today that essentially has the same ecological niche, you would have to look no further than bears. Bears have actually a habit and a way of living that's pretty similar to what the mesonychids would have had 55 million years ago. Then there is a large number of intermediate forms which have always been discovered in the last few years. Until a few years ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you the story about the evolution of whales because we didn't know anything about the evolution of whales. 53 million years ago, it is only a couple of million years after the animal that I just showed you, and that's nothing in geological terms, it's a blink of an eye. Another animal appeared called Hymalaiocebus. It lived in fresh water in the sea. If you wait another 3 million years, you have Pachycetus, which lived on both land and water. And then you have this guy over here, Ambulocetus, which appeared between 45 and 50 million years ago. It had very reduced limbs, and you can see already that it looks much more similar to what today is our marine mammals than to the animal that I showed you a minute ago. In fact, it looks pretty much, and it has the same kind of habit, it had probably the same kind of habit, the same kind of lifestyle as, say, a sea lion. So if you want to see what an intermediate form will look like actually today, you have to go to the zoo and look at these kind of animals live. Of course, I'm not saying that a sea lion is an intermediate between whales and whale ancestors, but it looks like what an intermediate would have been. A little later on, 35 to 40 million years ago, we have this fellow, Basilosaurus, and a variety of other species of which we have found the fossils. And this thing really has extremely reduced limbs, and it really had a completely marine habit. We know that because it's found only in sediments that accumulate under marine conditions, not under freshwater. So, we actually know from combining these two kinds of information, the fossil information about evolution by whales by descent, and the molecular biology of whales, that in fact whales are fairly closely related to hippos, which are these animals that we're showing in here. There's the hippo and there's the whale. They're very closely related, meaning that they share a common ancestor, last common ancestor, only about 55 million years ago. That's not that long ago. They both swim before walking. Obviously, the whales never walk, but the hippos do swim before walking. They nurse their young underwater. Their testicles remain inside the body, like in the case of the whales. They are hairless, like in the case of whales, because they're not very useful underwater. And they don't sweat, again, for the same reason. It's not very useful to sweat underwater, so they don't have glands to sweat. The third point that I wanted to make was that evolution is not a theory of the origin of life. The origin of life is sometimes caricatured as this thing over here. This is the primordial soup. That's my version of the primordial soup. The idea that there was this kind of raft of complex organic compounds that somehow gave origin to life on Earth. That may or may not have been the case. There are several alternative theories on the origin of life, but my point that I want to make tonight is that evolution has nothing to do with the origin of life. The reason for that is because evolution requires what's called heritable variation for natural selection to act. Before there were living organisms, by definition, there was no heritable variation. There was no genetic variation of these organisms because organisms were not there to begin with. So the transition between the non-living and the living, it's not really a matter of evolutionary biology at all. It is a matter of physical chemistry, or the interface between physical chemistry and biology. In fact, most of the people that work on the origin of life, and it is a very active field of research, there are several people that are interested in it. Most of those people are actually biophysicists or chemists, not biologists, for the good reason that there is nothing really that an evolutionary biologist can say one way or the other about the origin of life. It's just a different problem. Now, that doesn't mean that the origin of life is not a scientific problem. Of course it is. It's a pretty tough problem because it's something that happened probably only once and probably a long time ago. So and of course there's very little or nothing in the fossil record that can help us to figure it out. So it is a very tough problem. But there are different ways of approaching it. I'm certainly not going to give you the answer tonight. For one thing, it's because nobody knows the answer. For the other thing, is because it will require a separate lecture just on that. But one of the clues is coming from these kind of pictures and this kind of theory. There's a theory in a branch of mathematics now that's called complexity theory, which deals with the emergence of complex systems. And one of the things that this complexity theory explains is the emergence of these complex systems. You can't see much because this is a satellite picture taken at very low resolution, but those things that you're looking at there are